I shouldn't have noticed, but I did. Her fingers lingered on the spine of a book like she was afraid to let go, and I swear the way she tilted her head made the fluorescent lights above feel warmer than they should. It's weird, being 22 and standing behind the counter of a small, cluttered bookstore in a city that doesn't sleep. The smell of old pages and brewed coffee mixes in the morning air like it's trying too hard to feel cozy. She walked in just after 9, tall boots tapping softly, her coat hanging off her shoulders like it belonged to someone else entirely. She glanced at me, really looked, and I caught that flicker in her eyes. Not interest exactly, not yet, but something quieter, like a question, unanswered, floating between us. She smiled briefly and then turned away, and I caught the way her lips pressed together just slightly, as if she didn't want to give herself away. Her name is Claire. I know her mostly in fragments. I know the way she folds her hands when she's thinking. I know the faint scent of jasmine she leaves behind, subtle enough to make my head spin without me admitting it. She's in her mid-40s, confident, layered, the kind of person who seems to have stepped off a screen from a movie I've never watched but wish I had. I know she notices me noticing her, though she hides it well. This morning, she's distracted. I can tell because she's flipping through the new arrivals like she's reading between the lines, not the words. I want to say something, anything, but my voice sticks in my throat. Instead, I stack books on the counter and watch. And then, a small thing happens. A paperback slips from her grip, thumping softly against the oak floor. I bend to pick it up before it even hits the ground. She doesn't say thank you. She doesn't need to. Her hand brushes mine just as I hand it over. I feel that tiny spark, that quiet electricity that makes my chest both warm and hollow at the same time. She looks away, and her smile, just a hint, lingers like a secret. Her best friend, Marissa, is sitting in the corner of the shop, pretending to read a magazine, but clearly watching everything. I notice her lean toward Claire, whisper something. I catch it, not fully, but enough to hear. Talk to him. I freeze. The words hang in the air, the kind of thing you can't unhear. I glance at Claire. She doesn't look at me immediately, like she's measuring the distance between what she wants and what she dares to reach for. I feel my stomach twist, not in frustration exactly, just in something I don't have a name for yet. We stand there for a moment longer, too close to be strangers, but not close enough to be anything else. I notice the way her eyes flick to the books behind me, the way her hand fiddles with a loose thread on her coat, like she's trying to anchor herself somewhere tangible. I think maybe she's distracted by the room, by me, or by herself. I'll never really know. And then she walks past, leaving a little of her warmth hanging in the air. I watch her go, and I realize I can't stop thinking about the way her hand lingered, the ghost of a smile she tried to hide, the quiet weight of a whisper that might have changed everything. I don't know what that moment means. I only know I'm replaying it in my head as I stack more books, each one suddenly feeling like it's missing something, like the air itself is waiting for her to come back. The bell above the bookstore door jingled again, and I looked up before my hands had even finished stacking a pile of returned novels. It was her, Claire, coat slightly rumpled this time, hair falling into her face in a way that made her look unguarded, human, not the polished version I usually saw. She was holding a small stack of books that looked heavy for her frame. "Could you, help me carry these to the counter?" she asked, her voice light but careful. Like she was testing a boundary she wasn't sure she wanted crossed. I stepped forward, and the air between us seemed to thicken. I could feel it in the way the fluorescent light caught the faint strands of gray in her hair, the way her fingers brushed mine briefly as I took the heaviest one. A laugh escaped her mouth, a little shy, a little forced, and it was soft enough to make my stomach twist. As we walked together, I noticed small things. The way her shoulders slumped just a little, the subtle tension in her jaw, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear and seemed startled by how long it lingered there. She was guarded, yes, but not unapproachable. Not entirely. And in that space, I felt the magnetic pull I couldn't name. She paused at the counter, setting the books down carefully, almost ceremoniously. Her eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away, like she had been caught doing something she didn't want me to see. I'm sorry. I didn't sleep much last night, she admitted quietly, almost as if she was talking to herself. I hesitated. My fingers wanted to brush a lock of hair from her face, but I kept them still. Instead, I offered a small, careful smile. It's fine. Everyone has those nights. Her laugh, short and brittle, barely filled the space between us, but it was enough for me to notice how tired she looked beneath it. I watched the way she pressed her lips together, a micro-movement that seemed like she was holding something in, something unspoken, something fragile. She turned to rearrange the books on the counter, hands lingering over the spines longer than necessary. I caught the faint tremble in her fingers, the tiny flinch when one slipped under her grip. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. I realized I was holding my breath, just watching, just being there. For a moment, the shop felt smaller than it was, the walls closing in with quiet electricity. I could feel her presence like static on my skin, impossible to ignore, impossible to name. Her glance flicked toward me again, brief, almost accidental. The seconds stretched. My pulse quickened just a little, though I tried not to show it. Then, almost shyly, she smiled again. Not the guarded one from before, not the polite one. This one was softer, fleeting, like she had let something slip through her carefully built walls. And as she tucked the last book into place, her fingers brushing mine again, I felt it. The pull. The quiet, forbidden gravity that made my chest ache, the kind you couldn't speak out loud, the kind that made you want to reach across the counter and close the distance between what you wanted and what you could have. I didn't. Not yet. But I didn't stop thinking about it either. The rain had started in fits and stops, pattering against the bookstore windows with a soft insistence that made the fluorescent light feel harsher. I was closing up. She was still there, hovering near the back shelves, rifling through a box of older editions. The storm outside made everything feel smaller, more intimate, and I couldn't stop noticing her. How her hair clung slightly to her neck from the damp, how her sleeves rode up just enough to reveal the faintest crease of her wrist. I think I've found what I need, she said, voice low, almost to herself. I moved closer, hands folded, pretending to busy myself with straightening a row of novels. But I wasn't really straightening anything. She looked at me then, longer than necessary, like she was measuring something. Maybe courage, maybe restraint. I felt the pull, the same quiet gravity from before, but stronger, heavier, almost unbearable. I used to come here as a kid, she admitted after a pause, eyes on a worn copy of a classic that smelled faintly of mildew and memory. My mom brought me. Her voice faltered. She pressed her lips together, and for a second, I thought she might say more. But she didn't. Not yet. The room was quiet except for the rain, the clock ticking, and the soft scrape of her fingers over the book's spine. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice felt clumsy, out of place. Instead, I watched her, heart pinching in ways I couldn't justify, hands twitching slightly as if they might reach for hers but stop themselves. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I caught the brief tension in her shoulders. An ex? A friend? A reminder of a world outside this fragile bubble we were in? She hesitated before answering, just long enough for the storm to fill the silence. Hey, her voice was softer, reserved, careful. I stepped back without thinking, giving her space, but inside, I felt like I'd just stepped into quicksand. I didn't want to intrude, and yet, I couldn't stop noticing the way her fingers lingered over the phone, how her foot tapped once against the floor, almost imperceptibly. She hung up after a few minutes, smiling faintly but distracted. I could feel the weight of unspoken words between us, the electricity of proximity, the almost touch that seemed to hover in the air like smoke. I wanted to tell her something, to close the distance, to reach out, but I didn't. Instead, I adjusted a book on the shelf, hands trembling slightly despite myself. I caught her glance again, just for a heartbeat, and she smiled softly, the kind of smile that held a secret and invited one back, and I felt my chest tighten. For a second, I imagined leaning closer. I imagined brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, imagining her lips meeting mine in that quiet, suspended moment. The storm outside was loud enough to cover anything, but not loud enough to cover the sound of my own restraint. I didn't move, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop feeling the pull, the almost there, the weight of what could have happened if I had just reached out. And as she turned back to the shelf, the air between us thick and charged, I realized that the hardest part wasn't holding back. It was pretending that it hadn't almost happened at all. We were sitting in the tiny back room of the bookstore, the lights dimmed because the storm outside had made everything feel washed out, gray. She had her knees pulled up on the chair, arms wrapped around them, and I was perched on the edge of the table, pretending to sort through invoices. But we weren't really working. She sighed, a long, low sound that didn't belong to the rhythm of the storm, but to something inside her, something heavy. I looked up, and our eyes met. The air between us was thick, like we'd been holding something in for weeks without even realizing it. I don't know why I keep coming here, she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. Not a flirt, not an apology, just a confession that hung in the air. It's easier to be around people who aren't expecting anything. I swallowed, unsure what to say, because I was expecting something. I always had, even when I tried not to. I could see it in her hands, the way they trembled slightly as they rested on her knees, the way she pressed her lips together, like holding words back was a kind of discipline. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Silence felt safer than any clumsy response I might offer. I think you notice things about me, she continued, voice shaking a little. Things no one else does. And I don't know if I like it or if it's dangerous. Her words hung there, and I felt the weight of them in my chest. Dangerous. That one word cracked everything open. I wanted to lean forward, to reach out, to tell her it wasn't dangerous, that I wasn't dangerous, but the truth was, I didn't know either. I only knew I couldn't look away. We sat like that for a while, the quiet between us louder than any words could be. I watched the faint flicker of her eyelashes, the way her shoulders hunched slightly, as if the air itself were pressing down on her. I felt my own chest tighten, a slow, aching pull I couldn't name, couldn't place, couldn't control. Finally, she shifted, looking out the small window at the rain-soaked street. Her voice dropped even lower. What are we doing, really? The question hit me like cold water. Not about romance. Not yet, but about all of this. All the tension, all the unspoken things between us that were impossible to ignore anymore. I wanted to answer, but words failed me. She turned her head slightly, catching my gaze for just a second, long enough for me to feel the rawness there, the vulnerability she never let anyone see. And then, she looked down at her hands, twisting them together, as if she could untangle the mess inside by sheer force of will. I stayed quiet, knowing that nothing I said would fix it. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost to the storm, almost as if she were daring it to answer back. I'm scared of what I might feel if I don't stop. The words lingered in the room like smoke, heavy and inescapable. And I realized then that silence wasn't protecting us anymore. Silence was the line we were about to cross, and neither of us knew what would happen if we did. I found her in the corner of the bookstore again, curled into the armchair with a worn photograph in her hands. The rain had let up outside, leaving the air damp and heavy, the smell of wet concrete mixing with old paper. I stopped short, unsure if I should speak or simply let her be. She didn't notice me at first. Her eyes were fixed on the photo, lips slightly parted, almost trembling. Something about the way she held it, so carefully, so reverently, made me feel like I had stumbled into a moment I wasn't supposed to witness. It's silly, she said finally, voice low, hesitant. She didn't look at me. I found this when I was clearing out my apartment last week. My ex, he died a few years ago. Her fingers tightened on the edges of the photo. I didn't think I'd still feel anything. I thought I was done. I moved closer, careful not to invade her space, but close enough that the warmth from my body might reach hers. I'm sorry, I said softly. Not that I knew what I was sorry for, her loss, her pain, or the fact that I hadn't been able to make this easier for her. She let out a shaky breath and finally looked at me. Her eyes were glossy, but there was no theatrical sadness there, no plea for comfort, just quiet honesty. It's weird. You notice things about me. Small things. And it makes me feel seen in a way I didn't think I could anymore." Her words hit me unexpectedly. I wasn't trying to make her feel anything. I was just noticing her. And apparently, that mattered more than I realized. I could feel the tension in my chest, the slow ache of wanting to reach out and tell her that I noticed her for more than just her sadness, for more than just the echo of someone she lost. She shifted the photo slightly, showing a younger version of herself laughing with him, hair catching the light like it always did in pictures, untouchable and frozen in time. I felt a pang, a sharp, unfamiliar weight in my chest. I realized she wasn't just sharing a memory. She was sharing a piece of herself, fragile and unguarded. "I didn't tell anyone else about this," she said softly, almost whispering. "Not even my friends. I guess I thought it would make me weak." "You're not weak," I said, quietly, honestly. "Not for remembering. Not for feeling anything at all." She blinked at me, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips, but her eyes betrayed her. She was trembling inside, trying to hold herself together, and for a moment, I wanted nothing more than to reach across the small distance between us and close the gap. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but to offer her some unspoken solidarity. Instead, I just sat there, letting the silence hold her secret as fiercely as she did. Then she spoke again, almost to herself. "I didn't realize how much I needed someone to notice me, just me." The words settled between us, soft but seismic, a quiet tremor that made my chest ache in ways I couldn't name. And I knew, in that moment, nothing would ever be the same again. The bookstore was nearly empty that evening, the dimming sunlight filtering through the tall windows like a golden haze. She was sitting at the counter, sorting through receipts, and I lingered nearby, pretending to straighten shelves, but really just watching her. We hadn't spoken about the photograph, about the ex, about the storm of unspoken tension that had been building between us for weeks. And yet, somehow, the truth had seeped into the space we shared. It was in the way her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly when I moved a chair closer, in the quiet sigh she let out as she stacked a pile of returns. "I don't think I've ever felt like anyone noticed me," she murmured, almost without looking up. "Not really." I didn't respond with words. There was nothing to say. Instead, I slid a chair next to hers and sat down, close enough that the edge of my arm brushed hers. She stiffened for a heartbeat, then relaxed, letting that small contact remain. The shop smelled of old pages and faint coffee, the hum of the fluorescent lights above filling the silence between us. I watched her hands, those same hands that had trembled over a photograph, now moving calmly across the receipts, confident in their work, yet still delicate in ways that made my chest ache. We said nothing for several minutes. She glanced at me occasionally, and each time, it felt like she was testing the air, measuring the invisible line between hesitation and surrender. Finally, she let her hand shift, brushing against mine just once, softly, fleetingly, almost by accident. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. Her eyes met mine then, steady, layered, quiet. There was a vulnerability there I had only glimpsed before, and in that glance, I understood. We didn't need declarations or grand gestures. We just needed to be present, to acknowledge that the pull between us was real and mutual, and that it was okay to let it exist without words. I felt her breath against my arm as she adjusted slightly, leaning a fraction closer than before. The warmth of her presence, the subtle weight of her hand near mine, was enough to collapse all the walls we had been holding up. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, just the inevitability of two people who had been circling each other finally finding a quiet, shared space. She smiled, small, almost shy, and I felt a tension I didn't even know I'd been carrying release in that single gesture. I mirrored it, letting my hand rest lightly near hers, letting the silence carry what words could not. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the small, delicate shift happening inside the bookstore. The storm had passed, leaving only the quiet aftermath, a space cleared for what was waiting between us. I leaned back slightly, feeling the brush of her shoulder against mine, and for the first time in weeks, The ache in my chest softened into something warmer, steadier. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The moment held itself, fragile and complete. And in that quiet, gentle collapse into what neither of us had named but both understood, I realized that some connections didn't need words to be profound. Some truths didn't need confession to exist. They just needed space, presence, and the courage to stay. Her hand touched mine again, softly, almost imperceptibly. And for now, that was enough. Looking back, it's funny how small moments can feel enormous in hindsight. I still remember the smell of old paper in that bookstore, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the way Claire's hair caught the late afternoon sun. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was ours, a quiet collection of seconds that changed everything without either of us needing to speak a single word aloud. I've learned a lot since then. About noticing, about patience, about how love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it's in the brushing of hands, the shared silence, the way someone lets you sit near them even when their walls are high. Claire taught me that noticing someone, truly seeing them, is an act of courage in itself. And I taught myself that some of the deepest connections can grow in restraint, in respect for timing, in allowing someone's space to unfold without pressure. She's changed, too. I see it in the way she moves, more relaxed, more open, yet still cautious. She's learned that being seen doesn't make her weak, that allowing herself to care for someone else doesn't erase the past she carries. There's a softness to her gaze now, a quiet trust that was always there but had to be earned slowly, like sunlight pushing through a dense fog. For me, it was about learning to wait without losing myself, to acknowledge desire without demanding its fulfillment. There's a strange beauty in that, learning that love doesn't have to be urgent or loud to be real. It can be quiet, persistent, and stubbornly patient, growing in spaces that seem ordinary until you realize they're anything but. We didn't need grand gestures or confessions shouted over rain-soaked streets. We needed presence, understanding, and the courage to sit with the vulnerability that had taken months to uncover. Every pause, every glance, every tremor of hesitation mattered. And in that careful, unspoken way, we built something that was ours alone, fragile, imperfect, but unshakably authentic. Sometimes I think about the little sparks that brought us here, the brush of her fingers, the shared laugh, the stormy nights that forced proximity, the photograph that cracked open the walls she'd built around herself. Each one was a quiet reminder that connection often grows in the shadows of what we can't quite say. And now, years later, when I walk past that bookstore or catch a faint scent of jasmine in the air, I don't feel longing or regret. I feel a steady warmth, a reminder of what it means to truly see someone and to be seen in return. That's a kind of love that lingers in the spaces between words, in the silences, in the small gestures that make life unexpectedly extraordinary. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?